We appreciate your 12 years of dedication, Claire. But the company is moving in a different direction. My manager read the sentence like he was announcing a weather delay at O'Hare Airport instead of ending the career I had built one sleepless night at a time. The conference room was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the clicking sound of someone nervously tapping a pen against the glass table. I stared at the severance folder in front of me while the skyline of downtown Chicago reflected across the windows behind them. 12 years. 12 years of skipped vacations, canceled dates, missed holidays, and midnight client calls reduced to a gray folder with my name printed in bold black letters. The worst part was that nobody looked surprised. Not even me. I think some part of me had seen this coming the moment they hired Madison Reed 6 months earlier and told me to mentor the next generation of leadership. Madison was 29, polished, ambitious, and eager in the way people are when they still believe corporations reward loyalty. I used to believe that too. This isn't personal, Greg continued, adjusting his cufflinks while HR sat beside him pretending to look sympathetic. It's restructuring. Restructuring. Corporate America's favorite word, when they want to erase someone without admitting they're disposable. I nodded once and folded my hands in my lap because I refused to let them see my hands shake. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see employees pretending not to watch. A few looked down at their laptops the second our eyes met. Others stared openly, hungry for drama they could whisper about later over burnt coffee in the break room. I recognized that look. Relief. Relief that it wasn't happening to them. Yet, Greg slid the folder toward me. Your benefits continue through the end of the quarter. Security will help collect your things. Security. After 12 years of protecting this company from losing its largest clients, they were treating me like I might steal office supplies on my way out. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood slowly and smoothed the wrinkles from my navy blazer. The same blazer I wore during the Titan Biotech negotiations 3 winters ago when a snowstorm shut down half the city, and I slept on a hotel couch to keep the account from collapsing. Titan Biotech. $50 million annually. The account nobody else knew how to manage without me translating every unspoken concern, every executive ego, every late-night panic into solutions. Greg avoided my eyes now. That told me everything. This wasn't about performance. This was about replacing expensive experience with cheaper optimism. I'll pack my office myself, I said calmly. HR looked almost disappointed that I wasn't crying. The hallway outside the conference room felt colder than usual as I walked back toward my office. My heels clicked against the polished floor while conversations suddenly died around me. By the time I reached my desk, my email access had already been disabled. Efficient. My family photo was still sitting beside the monitor. My mother smiling at a lake house in Wisconsin 3 summers before cancer took her. I picked up the frame carefully and placed it in the box security handed me. Then I noticed something across the floor that made my stomach tighten. Madison was already sitting in my office. My office. My chair. My desk. Wearing the access badge they must have activated before they fired me. She froze when she saw me standing there with the cardboard box in my arms. Claire. I didn't know they were doing it today, she whispered. I just smiled politely because suddenly everything became very clear. They thought the clients belonged to the company. They thought relationships built over 12 years could be transferred like passwords in an onboarding document. And as security escorted me toward the elevators, I realized they had just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. The elevator ride down from the 32nd floor felt longer than it ever had before. Nobody spoke. The security guard beside me kept his eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers, while I held the cardboard box against my chest like it contained something fragile. Maybe it did. 12 years of my life fit inside that box now. A framed photograph. 2 notebooks. A coffee mug from a client conference in Denver. A silk scarf my mother gave me before my first promotion. Outside the building, Chicago wind whipped between the skyscrapers hard enough to sting my face. The revolving doors spun behind me, swallowing employees back into the life I had just been erased from. I stood there for a moment staring up at the glass tower. My tower. At least it used to feel that way. I remembered walking into that building at 35 years old with cheap heels, student loan debt, and the desperate determination of a woman who could not afford failure. Back then, nobody wanted the Titan Biotech account. The executives were impossible, the deadlines brutal, and the turnover constant. But I stayed. I learned every personality, every insecurity, every silent tension inside their leadership team. I knew which executive needed data and which one needed reassurance. I knew who hated morning calls and who secretly panicked before investor meetings. Relationships like that do not appear in spreadsheets. Companies never understand that until it is too late. My phone buzzed while I was waiting for the crosswalk light to change. For one irrational second, I thought it might be Greg apologizing. Instead, it was a LinkedIn notification. Madison had just updated her profile. Excited to step into a larger leadership role during this exciting new chapter for the company. I stared at the screen while taxis splashed through dirty snow along Michigan Avenue. Larger leadership role. They had promoted her before they even walked me out. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply tired. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones after spending years proving your value to people who were already planning your replacement. I opened the rideshare application on my phone, but before I could request a car, another call came through. This time I recognized the number immediately. Titan Biotech. Direct executive line. I stopped breathing for half a second as Daniel Mercer's name appeared on the screen. Then I answered. Claire, he said slowly, confusion already heavy in his voice. Why did your company just tell me you retired? For a moment all I could hear was traffic rushing past me and the distant wail of a siren somewhere downtown. Daniel Mercer never called unless something was wrong. Titan Biotech operated like a fortress. Every conversation was controlled, scheduled, filtered through layers of assistants and legal teams. The fact that he was calling me directly meant the situation was already unraveling. I tightened my grip on the cardboard box and stepped beneath the awning of a coffee shop to escape the freezing wind. I did not retire, I said quietly. Silence filled the line. Heavy silence. The kind that changes everything before a single word is spoken. That is not what Greg told us, Daniel finally replied. His voice had lost its usual calm executive polish. He said you wanted to step away from corporate life. He introduced someone named Madison as your replacement this morning. Of course he did. They had already rewritten the story before my office chair was cold. I looked through the glass windows of the coffee shop where people sat with laptops and headphones, completely unaware that my entire life had just shifted sideways in less than 2 hours. I was terminated during a restructuring meeting, I said. About an hour ago. Another silence. Longer this time. I could almost picture Daniel standing in his office overlooking the Boston Harbor, one hand pressed against his temple while his legal team hovered nearby pretending not to listen. Claire, he said slowly, you handled our account for 12 years. Nobody informed us you were leaving. There it was. The mistake. Companies love to believe clients belong to logos and contracts. But clients belong to trust. And trust takes years to build. I remembered the first time Titan nearly walked away from us during the supply chain disaster back in 2018. Greg disappeared to Aspen for a ski weekend, while I stayed awake for 36 straight hours coordinating emergency logistics across 3 states. Titan never forgot that. Daniel never forgot that. I apologize if this creates complications for you, I said automatically, old habits still clinging to me even after being discarded like outdated software. Daniel let out a sharp breath. That almost sounded like a laugh. Complications, he said. Claire, Madison could not answer basic questions during the call this morning. She kept reading from slides you clearly wrote. Our board noticed immediately. Snow began falling lightly across the street, dusting the shoulders of people hurrying through downtown Chicago. I closed my eyes for one brief second. Somewhere inside that glass tower behind me, Greg probably believed the transition was complete. Efficient, clean, controlled. But now I could feel the first crack spreading through everything they had built. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, the snow had started sticking to the sidewalks. Chicago always looked colder after bad news. The city lights reflected against the wet pavement while strangers hurried past carrying takeout bags and umbrellas, completely absorbed in their own lives. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped into silence. No emails waiting. No blinking work phone. No calendar alerts reminding me about deadlines across 3 time zones. After 12 years of constant urgency, the quiet felt unnatural. I placed the cardboard box on the kitchen counter beside unopened mail and stood there staring at it for a long moment. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel Mercer. Call me when you can. This situation is escalating. I loosened my scarf slowly and walked toward the living room window overlooking Lake Michigan. The view used to calm me after impossible days. Tonight it only made me feel untethered. I thought about Madison sitting in my office right now, probably trying to imitate confidence while Titan's executives questioned her in ways she was not prepared to handle. None of this was really her fault. Ambitious people say yes before they understand the weight of what they are accepting. I knew because I used to be exactly like her. 12 years earlier, I had walked into my first Titan meeting carrying printed binders with shaking hands while senior executives ignored me completely. Back then, Daniel Mercer barely remembered my name. Trust was not built through presentations. It was built at midnight during emergencies, during product recalls, during investor panics when everyone else disappeared. Greg never understood that because Greg only saw revenue charts. I was the one who absorbed the pressure underneath them. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not Daniel. It was Madison. I stared at her name across the screen before finally answering. Her breathing sounded uneven. Claire, I am sorry to call so late, she said quickly. But Titan is requesting an emergency review tomorrow morning and Greg wants all historical reporting from the last 3 years. I cannot access half the files. I almost smiled despite myself. Of course she could not. Most of the real work was never stored inside official folders. It lived inside relationships, private conversations, instincts developed after years of navigating impossible personalities. The files exist, I said calmly. You just do not know where to look. Silence. Then a quieter question. Did they really fire you this morning? I looked out across the dark lake while snow drifted against the windows. Somewhere downtown, Greg was probably reassuring the board that everything remained under control. But control is fragile when it depends on people you stop valuing too soon. Yes, I answered softly. And I think your company is about to learn something very expensive. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 out of habit. For 12 years my body had been trained to expect chaos before sunrise. International emails, client emergencies, calendar changes marked urgent even when they were not. But when I reached for my phone beside the bed, there were no overnight updates from my team, no meeting reminders, just silence and one unread message from Daniel Mercer sent at 4:12 in the morning. Call me before 8. Important. I made coffee and stood barefoot in my kitchen while snow covered the rooftops outside. The city looked softer under fresh snow. Almost honest. I used to love mornings like this before work consumed every empty corner of my life. Back when I still believed loyalty created security. By 7:15 I called Daniel back. He answered immediately. They sent Madison into another executive review last night, he said. Without greeting me. It was a disaster. I leaned against the counter quietly while steam rose from my coffee mug. Daniel rarely sounded emotional, which made his frustration impossible to ignore. She could not answer operational questions, he continued. Your company keeps forwarding us polished summaries, but nobody actually understands the account. I closed my eyes briefly. That was the problem with executives who only valued presentations. They thought confidence could replace experience. Claire, Daniel said carefully, I need to ask you something directly. Were you planning to leave before this happened?
No, iyan suara tunasli.
I intended to stay until retirement. Another silence settled between us. Then he exhaled slowly. That is what I thought. Outside my apartment window, traffic crawled through the snow while downtown Chicago disappeared behind gray clouds. Somewhere inside that office tower, Greg was probably holding emergency meetings already. I could picture him standing at the head of the conference table insisting everything remained manageable, while blaming transition issues and temporary communication gaps. Executives always think panic can be delayed with the right vocabulary. Daniel lowered his voice slightly. Titan is reviewing all current vendor relationships this quarter, he said. And several people on our board are asking the same question right now. I already knew the question before he said it. Why would we trust a company that discarded the one person keeping this partnership stable? My coffee had gone cold in my hand, For the first time since being escorted out of that building, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. They had removed me from the company believing they owned the relationships I spent 12 years building. But trust does not belong to corporations. Trust belongs to people. And deep down, I think Greg was finally starting to realize that too. 2 days after I was fired, recruiters started calling. At first it was subtle. A former colleague texting to check in. A recruiter asking if I might be open to confidential conversations. Then the messages became impossible to ignore. My LinkedIn profile views tripled overnight. People in this industry pay attention when large accounts start wobbling, especially accounts worth $50 million. I was sitting at a small cafe near the river when the call came from Halbrecht Strategic Group. Everyone in consulting knew Halbrecht. Smaller than my old company but sharper. Less interested in corporate theater and more interested in results. Their managing partner, Eleanor Bishop, asked if I would meet her for lunch. Off the record, she added carefully. We met the next afternoon at a quiet steakhouse downtown where executives like to pretend conversations were casual while negotiating million-dollar decisions over iced tea and salmon. Eleanor was in her late 50s, composed and observant in the way powerful women often become after surviving decades inside rooms built for men. She did not waste time pretending this was social. Titan is unstable, she said plainly after the waiter left. And everyone knows you were the reason that account stayed functional. I looked down at the condensation sliding along my water glass. Strange how quickly corporate loyalty disappears once money feels threatened. My former company still technically holds the contract, I replied carefully. Eleanor gave a small smile. Contracts matter. Relationships matter more. There it was again. The truth nobody at my old firm wanted to admit. Over 12 years, Titan had stopped trusting the logo on my business card. They trusted me. Eleanor slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was an offer letter. Senior partner. Compensation significantly higher than my previous salary. Full authority over client strategy. I read the numbers twice without reacting. Not because I was unimpressed, but because after being discarded 48 hours earlier, the sudden shift in power felt surreal. You moved quickly, I said quietly. Eleanor folded her hands together. Claire, I have been in this industry for 30 years. I know the difference between someone who manages accounts and someone clients would follow anywhere. Outside the restaurant windows, snow melted slowly along the sidewalks while downtown traffic crawled through late afternoon congestion. Somewhere across the city, Greg was probably still trying to convince Titan that replacing me had been seamless, efficient, strategic. But if Halbrecht already sensed weakness this quickly, then the rest of the industry did too. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. One more thing, she said. If Titan leaves your former company, they will need leadership immediately. And from what I hear, Daniel Mercer only trusts one person to stabilize the transition. I closed the folder slowly, already knowing exactly where this was heading. The official offer from Halbrecht arrived the following morning at exactly 8:03. Corporate people love symbolism even when they pretend not to. The email was clean, polished, and confident.
No dramatic premises. No exaggerated flattery.
Just numbers, authority, and one sentence that stayed in my mind long after I closed the message. We believe client trust should be protected, not exploited. I read it twice while sitting at my kitchen table with untouched coffee growing cold beside me. 12 years at my former company, and nobody there had ever described client relationships that way. To them, clients were revenue streams attached to quarterly targets. Replaceable. Transferable. Controlled. But relationships built during midnight crises and impossible negotiations do not transfer neatly between employees. They fracture. Around noon, my phone lit up with another call from Daniel Mercer. His voice sounded tired this time. Not angry. Tired. The board meeting did not go well, he admitted. I walked slowly toward the window overlooking the frozen edge of Lake Michigan, while snowplows crawled below through downtown traffic. Madison presented revised projections this morning, he continued. 3 different executives caught inconsistencies in the data within 15 minutes. I closed my eyes briefly. Madison was intelligent. Ambitious too. But intelligence without experience collapses quickly under pressure. especially in rooms full of executives who can smell uncertainty, the way sharks smell blood in water. Greg keeps insisting everything is under control, Daniel said quietly. But nobody believes him anymore. Outside, the sky over Chicago looked heavy and gray, the kind of winter afternoon that makes the entire city feel exhausted. I remembered sitting in those same executive reviews for years while Greg spoke confidently about strategies he barely understood because someone like me had already solved the problems before they reached him. Invisible labor. That was the real engine behind most corporations. Women staying late, fixing disasters quietly, carrying entire departments without recognition until leadership starts believing success happens automatically. Claire, Daniel said after a pause, if Titan decides to transition vendors, would you consider leading the account elsewhere? The question settled into the room like a shift in gravity. Not hypothetical anymore. Real. $50 million hanging in the balance because one company decided loyalty was less valuable than short-term cost-cutting. I rested one hand against the cold window glass and looked out across the skyline I had spent 12 years helping finance through endless contracts and negotiations. Greg probably still believed this situation could be repaired with meetings and public relations language. But trust does not return once people realize they were lied to. And deep down, I think Daniel Mercer had already made his decision before he even called me. 3 days later, Titan Biotech officially requested a transition review with my former company. The news spread through the industry faster than anyone expected. In consulting, people pretend to care about innovation and strategy, but what they really watch is instability. The moment a major client begins questioning leadership, every competitor starts circling quietly. I signed the agreement with Halbrecht that same afternoon in a conference room overlooking the Chicago River.
No dramatic speeches. No celebration.
Eleanor Bishop simply slid the contract across the table and said, "Welcome to the side that values competence." I signed my name carefully, almost calmly, though inside me something still felt unreal. 1 week earlier I had been escorted out of a building carrying a cardboard box. Now I was walking into a corner office with my name already etched onto the glass door. Senior partner. The title looked strange beside my name at first. Not because I did not deserve it, but because I had spent so many years shrinking myself inside rooms full of executives who benefited from underestimating me. By evening, Daniel Mercer called again. This time his voice sounded steadier. Resolved. Titan is terminating the contract effective next quarter, he said plainly. I sat in my new office watching snow fall beyond the skyline while downtown traffic glowed red beneath the early sunset. Greg tried to convince the board this was temporary, Daniel continued. Then Madison accidentally forwarded internal forecasting errors during yesterday's review. I closed my eyes briefly. Not out of satisfaction. Just recognition. Companies always assume experience can be downloaded into younger employees like software updates. But pressure exposes the difference between memorizing information and carrying responsibility. We want to move the account to Halbrecht, Daniel said. And we want you leading it personally. There it was. The moment Greg never imagined possible when security escorted me to the elevators. $50 million walking directly out the door behind the woman they considered replaceable. Across the industry, people were already talking. Recruiters, investors, former clients. Quiet conversations unfolding in restaurants and airport lounges about the company that fired the one executive holding everything together. I opened my laptop and saw another LinkedIn announcement from my former employer celebrating an exciting new era of leadership innovation. The comments underneath were brutal. People in this industry know how to read between corporate lines. They knew panic when they saw it. Then another message appeared at the top of my inbox. Greg. Subject line. Claire, we need to talk. I stared at the screen while snow drifted slowly across the city. For 12 years, Greg only called when he needed me to fix a crisis. The difference now was that this crisis belonged to him. Greg arrived at my new office on a Thursday evening just after 6. Most of the staff had already gone home, and the city outside the windows glowed gold beneath the early winter sunset. I saw him through the glass before reception even called upstairs. For the first time in 12 years, he looked smaller than I remembered. Tired too. His expensive coat was dusted with snow, and the confidence he carried into every boardroom had been replaced by something far less comfortable. Desperation. I told reception to send him up. He stepped into my office slowly, glancing around at the skyline views, the new furniture, the fresh nameplate beside the door. Claire Whitmore, senior partner. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Greg gave a strained smile that did not reach his eyes. "You landed well," he said quietly. I closed the folder I had been reviewing and leaned back in my chair. "I always did my job well," I replied. That seemed to hit harder than anger would have. Greg loosened his scarf and looked out toward the Chicago skyline. "Titan officially terminated the contract this morning," he admitted. "The board is furious. Investors are asking questions. We lost 2 additional accounts this afternoon." I said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. He already understood what he had done. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of ignored effort and invisible labor. Finally, Greg sat down across from me and rubbed both hands together slowly like a man trying to warm himself beside a fire that no longer belonged to him. "I made a mistake," he said at last. "We all did." Outside the windows, snow drifted softly over the city while traffic crawled below in ribbons of red light. I remembered all the nights I stayed late fixing disasters before executives even realized they existed. The weekends sacrificed. The birthdays missed. The years spent believing loyalty would eventually be noticed if I just worked hard enough. But corporations do not love people back. They love convenience. And the moment loyalty becomes expensive, they start calling it restructuring. Greg looked older now than he had only 2 weeks earlier. "Come back," he said quietly. "Name your terms. We can fix this." I looked at him carefully then. Not with anger. Not even with satisfaction. Just clarity. Because for the first time in my professional life, I understood something that would have saved me years of exhaustion if I had learned it sooner. My value had never come from the company logo on my business card. The company's value came from people like me quietly holding everything together behind the scenes. "No," I said gently. "You cannot fix this." Greg lowered his eyes. I think part of him already knew the answer before he walked into my office. He stood slowly, adjusting the same cufflinks he wore the morning they fired me, though now his hands seemed less steady. At the door he paused one last time. "I really thought the clients belonged to the company," he admitted softly. I almost smiled. "That was your mistake," I said. After he left, I stood alone beside the window overlooking downtown Chicago, while snow covered the streets below. My office was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft glow of the city lights reflecting across the glass. 12 years earlier, I walked into corporate life believing hard work guaranteed security. But standing there now, watching the city move beneath me, I finally understood the truth. They never survive because of the systems, or the executives, or the presentations. They survived because invisible people carried the weight no one else noticed until it disappeared. And when they walked me out of that building with a cardboard box in my arms, they thought they were erasing me. They never realized they were removing the one person holding everything together.